That should be good now. Thank you for catching that. Okay. Um, Opening the script, right? So if you have the script already on your object, just double click its name and it should open up. And so you can see in here, we have three big, I can close them. So there's four important sections. There's start, update, this function called control player, and then this function on collision enter. And these are all important. Start is a universal Unity function or method, I guess, and it's called all the code in that method is called the second the scene is loaded. So this is where you would put any like initializing statements where like, okay, you know for certain that you want there to be a certain move speed, or you want your character to know certain things about the objects around it. You would put all of that in start so that the second it wakes up in scene view, it's given all of that information. Update, everything inside update is called every single frame. So every frame of the game, all of the code in update is run. And that's kind of staggering to think about because imagine there are hundreds of game objects in your scene and they all have their own update methods. That's like thousands of lines of code being processed every single frame. But Unity handles it fairly well. So inside update, we have a call to this control player function. So we're saying, okay, every frame, call this control player code. And this is a bunch of somewhat complicated physics stuff, but you're basically just getting two directions, an X and a Y direction from your keyboard input and putting that into a vector and then pointing the character in the direction of that vector and saying move forwards. And all of this is simplifiable. Like this is a slightly more complicated character controller than it needs to be. But that's the really great thing about Unity is it can be this could be done in like 2 or 3 lines, or it could be done in like 200 lines. And that's the difference between a character that can move like forward and back and a character that can like do a somersault and climb walls and do a bunch of more complicated stuff. So it's really the level of complexity is totally up to you. And in this case, we just needed 4 directions of movement and jumping, and that's what this is. And this last section is we'll get back to this, but this is basically how you are going to be killed by the bad guy of the game later. So I explained all of it with all of it on. If I run this, everything works like it should. I should be able to use WASD and the penguin can move around and jump. So that's all just due to the script that we attached to it. I'm gonna turn on an additional script. It's third person. Okay. So I added a script to I added the wrong. So if you go to your main camera and click add component, search for a script called third person camera and add that. That's going to allow the camera to start collecting position data from the player and follow it around the scene. And we give this, currently there's no target. There's like the camera doesn't know what it's supposed to be looking at. So you can find your character in the scene, in this case it's the penguin, and you can drag and drop it into this target section. And that'll happen a lot where some script needs to access information and you need to either manually drag and drop the component that it needs access to, or you can fetch it through code, which we'll see an example of later. And then I'm going to change these variables a little bit. I was messing around earlier. I liked 8 and -10, but you can mess around yourself. That's basically just how, from what distance the camera will follow your player around. So now you can see the camera as the little penguin moves around the scene, the camera is following it. And you can't jump over the fence. because of this invisible collider box. Okay. So we have a moving camera and we have a moving character. And that was all accomplished through 2 scripts, which is pretty cool. Now I was going to open the floor for everyone to decorate their scene, but you guys can help me do that. We have a bunch of these things called prefabs. If I were to drag any object from the scene hierarchy into my file section down here, like these fences, for example, they would become this thing called a prefab. And prefabs are super helpful because without it, these fences are just they're just one instance of these fence game objects in this scene. If I were to delete them or destroy them or modify them in any way, the scene would allow me to do that and then forget about whatever previous history of those fences exists. Like I could control Z back to it, but it's only just remembering the state that the fence is in exist in at that moment. If you turn them into a prefab, it starts storing information about that object so that if I were to maybe make a tree prefab, which we're going to do, instead of having to go through and individually modify every single tree in my scene, I could just go modify the one prefab and it will communicate with all of the trees to make that change. So like maybe I want the leaves to be orange because it's fall. Instead of having to manually select every single tree in my scene, I could just change the prefab and every other tree will reflect that change. So where was I going with this? Yes. Decorations. There's a bunch of them. If you go to the prefab section and then decorations, you can start dragging and dropping things like trees. And you can move them around with this, with the little arrows. I'm gonna add some grass. Some flowers. Oh yeah, I had slides that go along with this too, actually. Was anybody else able to open the project? Okay. You're still making progress? So yeah, the penguin should have the player controller. There's this little check marks, just click it on. Bye, Lewis. Yep.
Oh, I wasn't in the game. Oh.
Okay, it's working.
Thank you for your help.
Okay.
I clicked the player.
What do you go?
Oh, I wasn't.
There you go.
Wait.
It's okay. Oh, that's the point. Okay, if you press play and the game is running, I totally should have mentioned this. So if I press play and the game is running, any changes that I make while the scene is running, like say I go in and turn this collider off and he sinks through the floor and just falls into the abyss, if I go out of play mode, that change is reverted. Like any changes that happen in play mode are reverted back to whatever state they were in before when you exit. Yeah, that's my bad. I should have mentioned that one. Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. So you can right click in your scene view and hit create empty, and we'll call this decorations, right? And then go to the top of your or like the top of your list of things and then hold shift and click at the bottom, and that'll select all of them. And you can just drag that big chunk under decorations and then close it and it goes away. And now those are all housed under this decoration object. And this is actually, wait, this is a good. So now we made this decoration object. This is what you would call a parent game object. And its children are all of these items that we added. But if we moved the parent game object around, now all of its children move with it. So if we ever wanted to adjust how our foliage looks without having to move every single like little mushroom, we can do that with our parent game object now. And we can also make our scene view look a lot less cluttered. So it's this decorations object. You can make an empty game object and then drag other game objects like on top of it, and it will start like nesting them. All right. Now we're gonna add special trees. So we're gonna open up this tree to prefab. So go to prefabs, decorations, tree 2, and double click on it. And we're gonna do a couple things. The first thing is we're gonna add a component called, what did I name it? Fruit spawner. We're gonna call it fruit spawner. So fruit spawner. Okay. Now this fruit spawner script does a couple things. It basically gathers a fruit object that we're going to provide to it, and then it waits a certain amount of time that you can also specify, and then it generates a copy of that fruit object at a point in space that you can specify. So that is what all of these little properties are. So we need to add a spawn point. So we're gonna right click on our tree and say create empty, and this will just be an empty game object because all we need is a position. We can name it spawn point. And if you'd like to see it a little bit better, next to this, like next to its name up here, you can give it a little tag. And then now, if you see, it's this like blue diamond rather than an invisible object. And then feel free to drag that anywhere under the tree, really, just anywhere under the tree that, like right here. I'm gonna say right here is fine. And that we'll drag spawn point in to this section in our code. And now we're sending position data to our code saying, okay, when I tell you to make this fruit, you know where to make it. You're gonna make it at these coordinates, whatever coordinates the spawn point has. Now it currently doesn't know what fruit it's generating, so we have to provide it with that as well. If you go into prefabs fruit, I have provided you with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 different fruit options. One of them's a peanut, so that's not really a fruit, but you have a bunch of different options of fruit. I'm gonna pick a banana. So just drag that banana object into fruit. Are we all following? Those of us following along, are we following? Okay. So where are we at then?
Where to get to the like the.
Oh, okay, sure. You're gonna get there by going to decorations and double clicking on the tree. Tree 2. So now you've opened the tree 2 prefab. No?
Oh, yeah, there we go.
Yeah. And then this little tick mark, spawn on awake, that just tells it whether or not to initially spawn a fruit or wait 30 to 60 seconds before spawning fruit. I'm gonna say yes. We're gonna check that box. I will pause for people to catch up, but this is an example of, instead of going into the scene and altering one tree so that it's like this, I made sure to alter the prefab so that any future versions of this tree share its behavior, so I don't have to worry about doing this again. That's if you learn if any of you are taking computer science classes and learn about like object-oriented programming, this is just a huge example of that. Of like every game object is quite literally an object, and it can inherit from other objects, and it's it's a really cool parallel between coding and how all of this is actually stored in Unity. Anyways, to exit the scene view, there's a small little arrow next to its name up here. And that'll bring us back. So if all is well, we should be able to drag a tree 2 into our scene, go to game view, hit play, and well, we gotta go over there. But it looks like it made a banana. And if we wait like another 45 seconds, it should make another banana. Right now we can't do anything to said banana. Like we can push it around. Wait, I'm gonna miss it. Yeah. Before that would happen, the banana would probably fall through the floor. But if the penguin made it to the banana, yeah, they would just pass through each other. Any second now, a second banana should appear. Okay, so there we go. We have a tree that periodically makes bananas or whatever fruit that you chose. So that's kind of going to be the crux of this game, is going and collecting this fruit. So add a couple of those trees. I'm gonna add. Oh, I'm not in scene view. Silly me. I'm gonna add like 4 and put them kind of separated. So now we have a scene with decorations, trees, and banana trees. I yeah. Okay. So you're probably, do you have a spawn point? Like, did you make this? Okay. So there's a spawn point section in our script attached to the tree. Drag the spawn point object into that little like slot. That should fix that problem. And yeah, so that's the error. That's the source of that error is the code knows that it needs to look for a spawn point. It just hasn't been provided one yet, and that's what you're doing by dragging it over. You're saying, okay, like this is what you're supposed to be looking for. Okay, back to the scene. So whatever fruit you selected, for example, I selected the banana. We're gonna add a script to this fruit object now, and we're gonna call it fruit behavior. So fruit behavior does a couple of things. But its main one is it has an on collision enter section. And what that's doing is it's just constantly checking for collisions. And if a collision occurs, it gathers it. That's what this blue collision is. And it's this collision is just a packet of information about the type of collision, what object it collided with, and various other things. So we're checking if the collision, if the game object that the collision is associated with has the tag player. And you're probably wondering, okay, what's a tag? A tag is a way for you to kind of classify your objects at a more macroscopic level. Um, so let's take this time to go find your character, and under their name and the inspector, you can give them a player tag. And now they're identified in the game as a player, and really all that does is any code that's looking for a player tagged object can now find your main character. And that's exactly what the banana's doing, because it obviously wouldn't want to. What we're trying to do is allow the player to go over and pick it up, like collect it, and we wouldn't want it to be able to interact with anything other than our player. So that's why we're saying, okay, only if you're colliding with a player object can you then um, do this, which we're gonna get through, and then it's gonna destroy itself, which is a little sad, but it's the way things go in this game. Um, Before we press play again, we have to add one more thing. I could, for the sake of time, just kind of like I've prepared a couple of drag and drops that you can just do like add, or I could show you how to make some of the UI. Would we rather keep going kind of faster or see how UI is created? Well, I don't know. I think personally, I kind of want to try to get through everything. So, if you go into prefabs, um, special, there's this blue box looking thing called counter canvas. If you drag that into your scene, this circle appears in your game view. And that's a counter. What we just added is a canvas, which is a UI element. We had an image that's like stuck to the top right hand corner of your screen called counter, and then we gave it a text, like, which is what this 0 is. The really cool thing about this text object is that code, just like almost anything in this environment, code can interact with it. So we are going to give another object. We're going to create an empty object. We are going to call it counter tracker. I think that's there's a piece of code that needs it to be named a specific thing. Let me go find that. Fruits tracker. Okay, we're gonna name it fruit tracker. The capital F and a capital T and no space. And on that, you are going to add a script called counter. And counter needs just one thing, a text object. And that's what you're going to get from your canvas. So if you open up the canvas that we just added, and it's like 3 hierarchy layers, the text will be the last one, and you can drag that into the counter section. And now, if I did everything right, this fruit tracker should automatically be found. So here's an interesting kind of example. This banana is not in the scene yet. There's nothing like, there's nowhere we could go to go find it and say, hey, I'm gonna drag and drop this counter tracker over to you so you know what it is. There's no way for us to manually do that because it only exists in the scene when it's created by this tree. So it's kind of a unique instance of this banana. So that's why we can do this thing where on start, so that the second that it's brought into this world, it goes and finds a game object in the scene called fruit tracker, which is why the name needed to be so specific. It goes and looks for an object. Thank you for coming. It looks for an object in the scene called fruit tracker, and that's how it's able to send information to the correct game object. So, assuming the canvas is in the scene, the text is connected to the fruit tracker, and everything is named properly, you should be able to press play and go pick up your fruit, and the counter should go up, signifying that you've collected 1 fruit. And now 2 fruits. And that'll just go up forever. Yes? Yeah. So I briefly touched on that. Whatever fruit that you ended up deciding upon, add the fruit behavior scripts to it. And all the fruit behavior script is doing is listening for collisions that are labeled player. And we're really almost done. So we have a player that can move around, we have trees that can generate fruit, and we have a scoring system. The only thing we're lacking is like a challenge, like something to make this more difficult. So that is where this guy comes into play. If you open up special, prefabs, special, there's this guy called Lion 1. And if you drag him into your scene, he's like this scary looking lion with laser eyes. And he took me way too long to code last night. But basically, he has, let me open up his script just so you can get a sense of like, this is a more complicated script than the player movement, but it's still not even that bad. Like it's like 120 lines long. Like that seems like a lot, but there's much more complicated things you could make. It's basically a bunch of if and else statements that give it 2 behavior states. There's like a relaxed state and an angry state. When it's relaxed, it will pick a random direction to move in and then kind of lazily just turn around and move again, and it'll repeat this, so it just wanders. But if you step into its little vision cone and it sees you, it'll start chasing you. And if it touches you, you get eaten, and that's game over for you. So let me see if I need to add anything. We do. So it needs a target. So we're gonna drag our penguin, our main character, in to fill that role. And it has the correct raycast origin. And then just variables, right? We can change its speed, its rotation speed. When it's mad, it walks at a different speed. All of this I've kind of already messed with, so you feel free to change it if you want to, but I think these values work pretty well. So let's just see running this what happens. So we got this guy, and he looks around, and he's not very aware of my presence, but if he looks at me, he will start chasing me. And if you can figure out a way to like escape his vision, he'll forget about you. Like he's stuck on this tree. He gets bored and forgets and will go on his merry way. But it's kind of difficult to do that. So another thing you can add are these boxes. You can put, you can drag and drop some of these boxes into your scene, and these are the perfect height where you can jump on top of them and the lion can't get you anymore. And if you stay up there for long enough, he'll forget and wander away. Yeah, the vision is purely horizontal. And yeah, I'm glad you asked about that. The way the vision works is a raycast. So there's a point, this little diamond on its nose, it shoots out a ray along this path. Like these yellow lines are kind of the boundary of its raycasting. and it shoots out a bunch of like, imagine them like information lasers. They basically just go out, and whatever they touch, they send back a little ping about like information about what they came into contact with. And if they ever send back a ping that says, "Hey, I just came into contact with the penguin," then it sends an alert to the lion to go into that more enraged state. But otherwise, it's just they're just kind of going off into the distance and
Like, out this step, it's part of this.
yeah,
So,
yeah,
like, it's like,
exactly. So right now, the distance, I don't know why it's such a weird number, but the distance is 7.93. If you were 7.93 units away from the lion, the raycasts will end before they come into contact with you, and it will not detect you. So it's only shooting the raycasts out for a fixed distance. Um, um, so yeah, I think there needs to be one more thing. Somewhere in here, there is a game over scene. And I think that's already attached to, okay, it's not. So go find your main character and the object, it should be kind of grayed out called game over. Drag that into the section of the player script that says game over. And we have a working game. That final step was just making sure that if the player comes into contact with the lion, it will turn on this game over screen. So let me go demonstrate that. If I bump into Mr. Lion, wait. Oh, wait. There's one more thing. Um, how do I know what I'm bumping into, right? I could be bumping into anything. The lion needs a lion tag. That's how the penguin is only checking for collisions with a lion object to trigger game over. I forgot about that. Now, assuming I didn't forget anything else, if I touch the lion, yeah, game over. It's not very cinematic. It's kind of scary to be honest, but that's what I came up with with the time I had. So some ways that you could play around with this. You could duplicate the lion with Control D a couple times and move them around. So there's multiple lions in your scene that you have to avoid. And I think that's a pretty complete game. We have an objective, we have to go get the fruit, and we can compete to get a high score, all while avoiding these lions. Yes. Hmm. Oh, okay. You know what? Did you drag in this target? Okay, so the lion, yeah, the lion needs to know what it needs to move towards. So you have to drag in your player character to that target section. That should fix it. And that was actually more efficient than I thought. I've been forgetting to go through my slides, but they're just uh about what we've been doing. So yeah, um, that's everything I had prepared in terms of where I wanted to get to with the game. Further directions could be adding sounds. That's a really cool aspect that I didn't get to go into yet. Um, I could briefly touch on how animations work. So there's this thing called an animator and an animator controller, and I think these are the coolest. So there's this little I don't even know what you would call this. They're called layers in Unity, but there's an entry state, and then that's basically when the object wakes up. It goes, this arrow says, okay, go from entry to the idle state, and that's playing the idle animation where it just like waddles back and forth. And then these arrows are different transitions. So it can go from idle to walking if this condition is met, if the condition walk equals 1. And then if you notice,
Where is player control?
Right here in the section of code where we're saying, okay, go walk towards the movement key, we're also saying anim, referring to our animator, dot set trigger, which is a function, walk 1. So we're saying turn on the walking animation essentially. And that information is sent over here. And whenever we press a key down, it sends a signal to say, okay, we're going to transition from idle to walking. And then the same thing can go backwards. If we're no longer pressing a key, we'll transition back to idle. And then this any state box is basically saying, okay, no matter what state we're in, if the player ever presses spacebar and jumps, we'll transition from whatever state we were in to the jumping animation. And then after a certain amount of time, just a fixed amount of time, we'll transition back to the idle stage. So it's just this big map of how can our animations flow into each other. And this is already a little bit complicated looking with 3 animations. So imagine like modern game characters that have like different joints and they can like roll and interact with the environment. At that point, they might even be beyond using a map like this, and they have like environmental based cues or something much more complicated. But it's really fun once you get a more complicated player controller to mess with the animation like map and try to get everything to work and flow smoothly. And it's really satisfying once you do get that. Yeah, that's everything that I wanted to talk about. If anyone has any questions, wants us to know more, I'm gonna stick around probably till everyone feels like they're comfortable heading out. I'm probably also gonna stop the recording here. Thank you for watching.